This is your World War III update. At the time of making this video, Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, is under massive bombardment by Russian Iskander ballistic missiles. This presumably is in response to the large attacks on Russian oil refineries that took place last night, like the one behind me in the Saratov region, just one in a string of seemingly endless series of attacks on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, now totaling in the hundreds. And these attacks are taking place as deep as 1,600 kilometers into Russia continuously, despite the change in the U.S. executive administration. Now, that's going to be important because the topic of today is an attempt to try and deliberate and decipher which of the prevailing narratives is true. Are we moving closer to peace, or is it all just a ruse and a grand deception, and we are in fact hurtling towards conflict, and neither side wants their populations to clue into that reality? There's something that people need to acknowledge, and that's a simple truism that typically, if you follow it, you're going to be right 75% of the time. And that's that you should believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. What we see is a continuation of the Biden administration's policies inside Russia, despite the promise of ending the conflict in 24 hours, which anybody who's taking Trump literally might try to say that he was being disingenuous. I'm willing to grant him some clemency in that respect and say that this is perhaps something that he needed to tell his constituents in order to put himself in a better position to, what he says, end and possibly derail this trajectory towards World War III. I'm willing to grant him the time that is required, because this is very much a complicated issue, and it's not going to be resolved with one phone call, as he repeatedly stated, and it's certainly not going to be dealt with in a span of 24 hours, okay? This is a very complex issue. If it was as simple as he claimed earlier in his campaign, then this situation would have been resolved a long time ago. The fact of the matter is that this is a very geopolitically and monetarily substantial conflict that has insane repercussions throughout the entire now multipolar world. And so what I hope to do today is present the best case for both of these arguments. I think that what we're seeing with our eyes is suggesting that the war is in fact going in the wrong direction, contrary to what we are being told by both the Russian and the Trump administration, who both have a vested interest in placating and quelling the curiosity of their population and getting them to stop asking questions, and the promise of prospective peace negotiations on the horizon can actually do a lot to boost morale, especially within the Russian economy that has been under the weight of the collective West's attritional campaign for the past 3 years. The Russians need to give their population some hope that this situation could potentially be redressed. But I don't think that that's going to happen. In fact, what we're seeing is the exact opposite. We are seeing threats to double down on sanctions by some of the primary diplomats who are involved in this. We are seeing these attacks deep inside Russian territory continue, all of which, remember, serve a dual function. Each one of these drone attacks inside Russian territory is a potential probing operation, testing the defensive strengths and weaknesses of Russia's air defense infrastructure. In such case that NATO ever did have to go to war with Russia, they would be in a very advantageous position. The longer these drone attacks continue, not only is it ultimately going to take a major toll on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, which is its bread and butter of its economy, it is also potentially putting it at a very extreme disadvantage if there was to be some sort of full-blown engagement between NATO and Russia, which of course would entail the use of nuclear weapons. The more they allow Ukraine to fly these drones into Russian airspace and relay that data back to NATO, the worse off they become, okay? Now, the fact that nothing has changed, presumably based on what we can see, We see the attacks, the drone strikes continuing. We see the weapons shipments continue to be delivered. And do you notice how they came out and made a very public statement? They made a very public display of how they were stopping all aid to Ukraine. Now, at the time, the people who are reading the fine print were saying, no, actually, you're not. But in a very underhanded way, a couple days later, they actually recommenced all of the aid that was continuing to go into Ukraine. Okay, so they're trying to pretend as though they're doing something when they're really not. Now, Steve Witkoff, who is Trump's personal envoy, went to Moscow today and brought back a prisoner. Okay, now that was a potential foothold, a starting point, hopefully, for negotiations. However, it should be noted that there have been many prisoner exchanges throughout the last 3 years under Biden's watch. So this in itself is not fundamentally any different than what has transpired before. But a lot of people, I think, are exaggerating and amplifying this as being something more than what it actually is. Okay, and I'm just trying to really paint both sides of the fence here, because the goal of this channel is to get you guys to think. It's not for me to just come on here, aggregate, disseminate, and then try to beat you over the head with my opinion or politic or ideology. The goal is to get you to think. So if you see me equivocate and be ambivalent about a particular issue, it's because it's a thought process and there is a fog of war. We don't know what's coming. What we can see with our eyes is not what we're hearing with our ears. When they say that things are getting better, we're not seeing that at all. What are we seeing? We're seeing gold prices skyrocket, which of course is the canary in the coal mine that something in the system is about to break. It could be geopolitically related. It could just be ado with a finance and the monetary system. It could be ado with the US dollar as a reserve currency. It could be ado with a variety of things outside the geopolitical war realm. But we need to presume, at least in light of everything that is transpiring here and the fact that we're not seeing any curtailing in the hostilities between Ukraine and Russia at all. I mean, there has been none whatsoever. In fact, we're seeing a ramping up of hostilities in the Baltic. Today, in Polish airspace, a Russian Su-24, I presume, I don't know all the details of it, but I presume it was probably within the Kaliningrad region, entered Polish airspace, I should say, for 90 seconds, which is a significant period of time for an armed fighter jet to enter, especially considering the proximity to the conflict zone. So we're seeing tensions flare up across the board. We're seeing these attacks deep inside Russia continue, but we're hearing a lot of rhetoric and a lot of promises of maybe there'll be elections in Ukraine and maybe there's going to be peace negotiations on the horizon. On the flip side of that, we're also seeing the promise of doubling down on sanctions by some of the chief diplomats involved here. They're talking about a Lend-Lease deal, which has just been introduced as a bill in Congress, which of course will be the subject of great debate for the months to come, I presume, which is potentially going to enter into a Lend-Lease deal with Ukraine. Okay, kind of on the other side of that Lend-Lease deal that we've seen in World War II. And this is going to empower Ukraine with potentially even longer range weapons. And many within Trump's cabinet have already said that they're advocates of doing deeper strikes, even if it means striking Moscow, okay? And we've seen Russia's pain tolerance. So I would not be surprised, and we've already seen attacks on Moscow with drones. We've seen an attack on the Kremlin almost 2 years ago now. So this is not unprecedented at this point in time. So are we going to continue to see hostilities ramp up? Has Trump even had a phone call with Vladimir Putin? You know, I say I equivocate a lot, but so does he with respect to this issue. And this is very out of character for Trump, who you would suspect if there was any good news to report, he would be reporting it with confidence, but he's not, okay? He's kind of waffling on the issue and saying that he had a great call in the usual superlatives and, you know, it was the bestest call ever and all this stuff. But we're not seeing anything tangible aside a POW that was returned, or a prisoner that was returned, and that is something that is not unprecedented because that's happened several times under the Biden administration. Now, the fact that Witkoff went there personally is a potentially positive sign, although I don't think any American is concerned about flying to Moscow. They're not. It's not like a matter of security because, I mean, the American ambassador is still inside Russia, but the converse is not true. There is no Russian ambassador, and that's another thing. There's no Russian ambassador in Washington, okay? Now, this is supposed to be one of the biggest issues of our time, and Trump is signing all these executive orders. The Gulf of Mexico, okay, the transports thing. I agree with a lot of these things. The Gulf of Mexico, like, I don't give a shit what you call. I mean, that doesn't affect us materially in any meaningful way. If that gives you a bit of pep in your step, okay, but, you know, fundamentally, it doesn't change the fundamentals. Many people are, you know, and this is probably one of the wisest phrases ever uttered. Penny wise and pound foolish. Penny wise and pound foolish. They'll nickel and dime and they'll go through and they'll do an audit of the millions, but it's the billions and it's the trillions that really count, okay? And that's where the truth actually lies, but they're never going to go there. But people are going to be appeased by these trinkets and tokens of change that aren't really fundamentally changing anything. But anyways, so if Ukraine war, which is one of the biggest drags on the U.S., how would you say, what's the term for it? Spending, discretionary spending, I guess you'd call it. One of the biggest, you know, drains, this protectorate that's being erected. You know, basically, Ukraine is a protectorate of the United States. They are solely now relying on the support primarily of the United States. Without support of the United States, they would collapse, okay? And being their benefactor, you would think that this would be the top priority for Trump. I mean, I'm still waiting on details about the drones. Remember when they said they were going to give us all the drone information, and they came out and they gave this very vague, repeated statement of what the Biden administration said, and everybody just forgot about it. We're still waiting on the JFK stuff, which is probably going to be 90% redacted, and it's going to give people a wild goose chase, you know, and that's going to be news to take attention away from something else. And I can tell you this, they're getting all this stuff ready to roll out all of these pennies when the pound fails, okay? They're getting ready to give you pennies when the pound fails. And so they're going to do the Epstein thing. They're going to do the audit of the military-industrial complex. It's not going to really change anything fundamentally. They're still going to continue to spend the money. They're going to do some things. They're going to do tangible things, don't get me wrong. But it's pennies compared to the real fundamental change that actually has to happen. And it's all going to be in the interests of the oligarchs, you can 100% presume. Understand, with Elon Musk in particular, one of my central criticisms is that his companies have benefited from government subsidies and these carbon credits that they've accrued as a result of them supposedly making zero-emission vehicles. We're talking about billions of taxpayer dollars that have essentially allowed Tesla to get to a level where it could first be incorporated into the S&P 500, and I was an early investor in Tesla before there was any hype, before the Cybertruck, all of that stuff, okay? I was a believer in the whole thing until I realized that it was a Trojan horse for everything that these guys claim to rail against when it comes to the World Economic Forum, you know, owning nothing and being happy, the global surveillance apparatus, and all the rest. Everything that they say they're against, they're actually ushering in, and they're doing it using government subsidies, okay, and to the tune of billions of dollars. They want people to forget about that, and now they want to remove those because they want a monopoly, or an oligopoly, I suppose, because it's a few corporations. It's not just one yet, even though Elon Musk is on record saying he wants one app to rule them all. And people seem to be perfectly okay with that as long as he cracks some jokes and posts some memes and, does some silly things every once in a while that can seem relatable. Again, penny wise and pound foolish. Now, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent because this is the big issue. The war between Russia and potentially the United States is one of the most defining issues. This is the issue that should have been tackled immediately, or should be devoting a lot more resources and bandwidth in the early phases. The Gulf of Mexico thing, I mean, okay, you could say that it was easy and it was an executive order that didn't require a whole lot of thought. Fine, but as this situation ramps up, as the Americans continue, and there's been you'll understand this, and I was the first person to say and to hold Trump to account when Biden permitted the Ukrainians to do deep strikes into Russian territory using NATO weapons, and Trump didn't say anything, and people were saying, well, he's going to walk it all back right when he gets in there. It hasn't been yet. There's been no fundamental policy change whatsoever. In fact, Ukraine has attempted some big arrow maneuvers in certain places. So this is kind of where we're at right now, where everything is pointing towards escalation, just like I said, because this is a very geopolitically complex situation. The United States, as much as Trump would like to make a deal, I think he's starting to realize, and I'm sure that he knew this before, and perhaps he thought that his team would rise to the occasion, and that I think at this point in time, the only hope is that the Ukrainians and the Russians burn themselves out, and they just need a break. And then we're able to get a détente in hostilities, not a lasting peace treaty per se. And certainly neither side is going to trust each other, especially when a lot of the conditions of both sides preclude any sort of advance in the negotiation talks. Chief among them is security guarantees that, of course, is like an Article 5 with the United States for Ukraine, which would, of course, allow the United States to come to Ukraine's aid should hostilities flare up again in some more meaningful capacity. In addition to that, the placement of troops, peace troops, which are independent of NATO, so their involvement wouldn't necessarily invoke Article 5, but which would drastically restrain Russia from being able to audit what is happening inside Ukraine, and would make it a de facto NATO state, even though it claims not to be a NATO state. And Ukraine would rearm itself and will be doing the same thing in 5 years, and all the blood Russia will have shed will be for naught, okay? And the deal to exchange $500 billion in Ukrainian resources, that Zelensky is more than happy to just sign his country away for that. And I still don't understand, exactly what's going through Ukrainian people's heads. I know that they must be exhausted at this point, but I think it's such a totalitarian society and a military dictatorship at this point in time that you have a person who has long since overstayed their political term. They are now not even a legitimate president. You can say that they are in light of martial law and the war happening, but many people don't believe that, especially the ones who are being hauled off the streets, kicking and screaming against their will to be used to throw at the Russian advance, and most likely die without ammunition, without training, and basically just used as cannon fodder, period, point blank. And now they want to lower the age to 18 to 24 in compliance with the demands of the United States, something that still remains unchanged. You'll notice that all of these policies are a direct continuation. The Ukraine-Russia issue is far too big. If the United States wants energy dominance, which they do, they want natural gas dominance over their vassal states in Europe, they have to keep the Russians back at bay. Remember that old adage that we repeat on this channel way too much, but it's the truth. The Americans in, the Russians out, the Germans down. That's essentially NATO's role. And no, NATO cannot, and Russia and America will not abandon NATO entirely, because that will mean the death of US as a global hegemon. Now, they could be executing a burn the bridges burn the boats strategy here, where they're repatriating all the gold from London, and they're going to say, London, now you're responsible for Ukraine. That could be what's happening here, is that they're making the handoff. We already know that Zelensky's Secret Service detail is provided by the MI6. So the Brits are largely, in many ways, deeply involved, and they were the ones, arguably, depending on who you like to listen to, Boris Johnson was the one who stopped the peace talks that were in progress in Istanbul early in the conflict and encouraged Zelensky to continue on because they would extend their support. So this is now potentially going to be London's war, but I don't know if that is necessarily what's happening here. Again, I'm giving you all the anecdotes. I'm trying to give you all the information so you can come to your own conclusions, because I'm not here to tell you what is what. We just simply don't know. The fog of war is really thick right now, and Trump is trying to straddle that line. I'm sure he wants to make a deal of some sort, even if it is just to put the brakes on things or to slow things down for a little bit. But it's a far more complicated issue because both sides' terms basically preclude any sort of advance in the negotiations. And the other wild card here that not a lot of people think about is that you have rogue elements, arguably within both sides, who would like to sabotage negotiations. And so you're not only contending with the fact that you can't reconcile each side's differences, you're also contending with the fact that the Russians are claiming that there are certain elements within Ukraine who are trying to sabotage negotiations. Case in point, this is a shot of Kyiv. Of course, we don't have any real footage of Kyiv. We have a 3-second clip that is very blurry because it's illegal to post videos there. There is a claim being made, and of course, Russia makes a lot of claims, and usually they put these things out in advance in an attempt to stymie the progress of this type of clandestine operation, in an attempt to prevent it from occurring, essentially. Kyiv plotting to drag NATO into a war in Moscow. Now, I've warned you that shots are going to be fired in the Baltic. The stage is set. The Baltics are disconnected from Russian energy now. They have fortified their borders, and there are NATO warships with an ongoing mission in the Baltic for the search and seizure of Russia's Shadow Fleet. What could possibly go wrong? The Shadow Fleet that is paradoxically actually delivering oil to those same countries, okay? Now, they are claiming that there's an alleged plan involving staging a foreign vessel explosion in the Baltic Sea, according to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. Now, again, the Russians wouldn't just say this if there was nothing to it, okay? The Russians say these things in an attempt to interdict them. Ukrainian Special Services, with Western support, now this is critical, with Western support, are they talking about British support, or are they talking about American support? Because we very well could be seeing a divide ensuing with the more isolationist policies of Trump, but I'm not 100% convinced about that yet. Now, just to be clear what I'm talking about, there are two conflicting views. One is that the U.S. wants to burn the boats, go isolationist, get rid of the petrodollar, because then they can price oil however they want to give themselves an advantage within their own society, to be an export nation, and basically turtle in, F the world, not police the planet anymore. Of course, this will backfire because somebody has to, in order to maintain the global waterways and all that. So it's a very confusing predicament. So I'm still on the fence as to whether or not that's the goal. The other goal is to continue to keep the Russians out and maintain control of Europe, to keep Europe subjugated, to keep the euro subjugated. If the Russian energy empowers European industry, that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, that's the end of the United States as the global hegemon. That's what a lot of people don't get into, but there's definitely a lot of truth to that. Now, in addition to that, it's also important to understand that the Russians are going to be, they're going to be amplifying any morsel of a positive diplomacy that occurs between them and the United States to appease their own population. Not because it's actually true that peace negotiations are going well. The Kremlin has declined to state whether or not Trump and Putin have had a phone call yet. Of course, they're very judicious, unlike Trump, who just blurts out that they did have a phone call. Some people don't necessarily believe that that happened, or that if it did, maybe the phone call didn't go so well. I'm getting the sense that it probably didn't, because this is, like I say, very out of character for Trump to just leave some breadcrumbs and not provide more information with the adulation you would expect from him in those circumstances, especially with such a big arrow issue, right? Anyways, so Ukraine Special Services with Russian support are preparing a series of high-profile provocations to implicate Moscow and draw NATO into a direct military confrontation, according to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. In a statement on Tuesday, the SVR claimed that Kyiv plans to use Russian-made naval mines to orchestrate an explosion involving a foreign vessel in the Baltic Sea. The alleged goal is to blame Moscow and prompt NATO to restrict Russia's access to the Baltic on the pretext of ensuring maritime security. Now, you can bet that because Ukraine doesn't have access to the Baltic, at least not directly, that this would be something primarily orchestrated by Western nations, as was the case with Nord Stream. Perhaps there were some Ukrainian patsies involved with that detonation, with that event, which most people think was intentionally done by the West at this point. I think that's the prevailing unspoken consensus. Anyways, we can presume that this will be very similar, that this will indeed be something done by the West to ensure that there can be no peace brokered between Russia and Europe. So there are still elements within Europe who are incredibly fearful of the Russians. Whether legitimate or not, we're not making a value judgment here. We're just saying that this is the case, this is happening, and the stage is set for some sort of altercation to occur in the Baltic Sea. What's likely going to happen is that they're going to board some of these ships. They might be an oil tanker or some other Russian vessel that is on its way to Kaliningrad or wherever, and there's going to be a firefight, or there's going to be resistance, and they're going to refuse to allow a NATO warship to board them in international waters, or we're going to have Russian warships escort their ships, and that is going to be where the altercation arises. If it's not just a continuation of the undersea cable war, which is currently being waged, this of course would be the next step of that. So the stage is set for hostilities to flare up in the Baltic, and I cannot foresee, at least at this point in time, any tangible plan being proposed by Trump that the Russians would be receptive to. They're just, the ones that they have proposed have been outright rejected for numerous reasons that I won't get into, but it's primarily because it requires concessions on the Russian side, and it involves NATO troops inside. They won't be considered NATO troops. There'll be some independent Peace Corps, but inside of Ukraine. NATO has been increasing its military activities along Eastern Europe's borders in recent years, citing security concerns. Last month, it announced to expand its presence in the Baltic Sea, launching a new mission to safeguard undersea infrastructure following a series of disruptions and damage to cables between member states. So that is the other ulterior motive there, is to investigate ships to see if they have malintent. Poland recently claimed that Russia invaded or violated its airspace for 1 minute and 12 seconds, very precise, at a depth of 6.5 kilometers. Not sure what the reason for that could possibly be. particularly if it's in the Kaliningrad region outside of the actual conflict zone, but it happened. As I reported yesterday, Russia said that U.S. relations are on the brink of collapse, and they refused to confirm the Trump call claim. Now, for the Russians and all of Russian media, who is collectively amplifying these positive messages, as I will show you here, messages like, Witkoff going and rescuing the prisoner, or, they're preparing for surrender and Putin's going to get everything he wants from Trump, serious progress achieved in resolving the Ukrainian crisis. Zelensky says in case of talks, he will offer straight territory in exchange. And all of these optimistic projections, we're going to see a Munich conference take place in the next couple days between European nations, and I believe the Vice President Vance is going to be there as well. So I think after this weekend, we will know if there's going to be a fundamental shift in policy from NATO towards Ukraine. But, up until this point in time, we really don't have anything definitive. We have to navigate what appears to be conflicting accounts, what we see with our eyes and what we're hearing, which is sunshine and rainbows. But again, Russia has a vested interest in alleviating its population's concerns by giving them hope that peace is around the corner, when it very well could progress into something much, much worse. And fundamentally remember that the cause of this war with Russia, despite all of the political wedge issues and Russiagate and all that nonsense, many of the policies that Trump undertook were in fact very contentious with the Russian interests. In terms of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty was a primary driver. Trump's Space Force policy was likely another big driver. You know how the Russians are always accusing the Americans of militarizing space. Well, where do you think that all originated, right? So these are things that people forget. These are the pounds. People only look at the pennies. The penny is going to be Trump going and shaking Putin's hand. But what's really happening behind the scenes is escalatory, and it's incredibly dangerous. So that's just a reality. It's not a judgment call. It's not a value statement. Here, Robert Fico is incredibly aggressive in his statements. He's the president of Slovakia, and he is basically saying the following here. And this is the guy who they tried to assassinate, remember, was a Ukrainian. I'm not sure if he was an agent. It looks like my camera might possibly overheat here, so we might not make it through this video. Unfortunately, I apologize. It's a little hot in here because I cranked the heat because it's really cold outside. Anyways, Fico here is saying that they could potentially cut off the gas to Ukraine. Now, why he would be saying something so provocative like this, I don't know. At this point in time, I don't understand the dynamics entirely between Slovakia and Ukraine. I know there's definitely a difference of opinion along a lot of things, considering that they get a lot of their resources through the pipelines that Ukraine has shut down. So this is retaliatory in nature, and it appears to be a rift, certainly within NATO countries, that is escalating as well. So you have a lot of conflicting and elements here that potentially would want to sabotage deals. And that, of course, complicates the negotiation process a lot. Again, we keep hearing, this is from a Russian website, okay? He even got a halo around his head and all this stuff. And again, penny wise, pound foolish. Let's see what he does, okay? What else do we got here? Oh, yeah, so Hegseth, just like I said, I told you guys, I told you so. He's making the rounds. He's doing the G.I. Joe thing. Just like I said. You got to give me my props, okay? This is the new meme right here. Everybody's comparing this guy to this guy. Well, look, you're a bigger target when it comes to warfare and luck in a rug. Being big like that is not necessarily going to help you unless it's in hand-to-hand combat. And he's probably arguably out-angling Pete. And hey, Pete's giving her. He's giving her, man, so you got to give him his due. He's doing the CrossFit thing. Little light on the weight here. Looks like he's got 90 pounds on there, but hey, he's doing it. Anyways, what did I say? I told you guys this is what his purpose was, to do this shit, right? Because they're trying to convince a non-collectivist, entitled generation that they need to go and fight and die for their country. The problem is it's not going to work because we're far too individualists. They got to make it really cool, and they need a big 9/11 event if you want to galvanize people towards that end. It's just simply not going to happen, okay? In Iran, apparently, shit's hitting the fan. I probably don't have time to get into this one today, but apparently they're shouting death to Khamenei, and there could be some sort of insurrection fomenting there within that country as we speak. There's certainly, definitely some latent tension building that we don't hear about with all of the Iranian military exercises. They are taking the threat of U.S. attacks and Israeli coordinated attack very seriously, and I don't think they're believing Trump for a second. In fact, Khamenei, the Ayatollah, has outright said, we don't trust the Americans, when the olive branch was seemingly being extended by Trump towards them. Now, I just want to share this funny clip with you today, because if this doesn't prove we're living in an idiocracy, I don't know what does. Let's hear what she has to say. This is on CNN. I don't know if they were... Oh, what's happening with her? Oh, we don't got audio. Anyways, she basically... Elon Musk changed his name on X to Big Balls. And so CNN referred to him as Big Balls, and he got a kick out of that. This is the HR 1158 to provide enhanced authority for the president to enter into agreements with the government of Ukraine to lend or lease defense articles to that government to protect civilian populations in Ukraine from Russian military invasion or for other purposes like invading Russia. This was another, the Liberals are starting a F Trump fund. It doesn't stand for FUCK Trump. It stands for, like, I can't remember what it is again. Unfortunately, the audio is not working on my computer. It does this sometimes. I'm not sure why. But it's a, I'll talk about it tomorrow. It's another, acronym for something. I can't remember what it is, like freedom from Trump or something like that. But they're calling it the F Trump Fund, of course, just to try to be cute. I mean, Elon Musk does it, so I guess anybody can do it at this point in time. We're living in a cartoon. It doesn't really matter. Steve Witkoff, the guy who flew to Moscow, most people don't know his backstory, okay? So his backstory is he's a billionaire, and he actually owns the building that the Federal Reserve gold is held in, 33 Maidan Lane. He owns that building. The building that holds all the gold, he owns the building. So it makes me wonder, with this COMEX arbitrage crisis, whatever it is that's going on with the Bank of London, it makes me wonder if these things are related at all. The guy who owns the building, who's leasing it out to the Federal Reserve, I mean, think about that. The government's leasing a building to hold all the gold in. I mean, that's crazy on its face. But yeah, I mean, nothing surprises me at this point in time. What else do we got here? I just thought that was an interesting fact that most people are unaware of. They're talking about revaluing the gold. It's even a conversation that has now entered the mainstream, with CNBC doing a piece on it. This is a 5-minute piece, and they're talking about revaluing the gold. I think it's still valued at like $45 an ounce, and when in reality it's more like $2,900, approaching $3,000 an ounce. Gold prices soar as Korea Mint halts gold bar sales amid soaring demand. In some places within China, there are lineups, and they're basically limiting people's gold purchases to 150 patrons per day. So in an attempt to stop a bank run, because remember, the elites, the power brokers, they don't want the price of gold to go high, because then they have to buy it at a higher price. So they got to keep it suppressed. Look at this guy raging about Bitcoin here. Ash Crypto, can you stop effing selling for one effing day, man? Can we please have one green effing day on this bull market? Because Bitcoin is trading within this 90,000 to 100K range. And all I can say is that if you're basing your retirement strategy on somebody buying and hodling a nothing that doesn't exist in the digital ether, then I mean, this is textbook collapse. This is what you see in a collapse. It's just far more drawn out in its rationality than it has been in previous generations. Okay, and in addition to all of the aforementioned reasons and ways in which this war between Ukraine and Russia is escalating, contrary to what we're being told, the U.S. is pushing European allies to buy more arms for Ukraine. So they're actually, behind the scenes, encouraging Europe to buy more weapons for Ukraine. And so I think Lindsey Graham today was complaining that Canada isn't buying enough weapons. So as long as we buy weapons from the United States, I guess they're happy. So, I mean, look, we got to rebuild our military, especially here in Canada. That goes without saying. So if that's what it's going to take to appease and broach this divide between the bridge this divide, I should say. Both of those terms didn't work. They were close though. Between the U.S. and Canada, just for us to buy more weapons to basically equalize the trade. Then, I mean, that's a pretty easy problem to solve. We can just buy hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons over the course of the next 10 years or something to that effect. The Russians are finding explosives in their FPV, first-person view goggles that they use for drones. This is a sign that the supply chain is very corrupted. These are drones which I presume are coming from China, possibly, maybe being intercepted along the way, but this is the exact same thing that happened with Hezbollah. And you can see he opens it up here, and let me see if we're gonna, oh, it's gonna make us wait. We're gonna have to watch the whole thing. Anyways, he undoes the whole thing, and he finds this little square explosive in the side part of it. So this is something that we're contending with, and this is why, this is just another wrench thrown in the global supply chain, the reason why everything is going to have to be onshore, no matter which country you're in, simply because you can't trust what you're getting. And every single electronic is going to have to be dismantled and inspected before it makes its way to the front. I'm not sure why my computer is acting so strange right now. Too many tabs open. Sam Altman and Elon Musk are fighting. Sam Altman called Elon Musk insecure. Sam Altman's got some very weird skeletons in his closet as well, as I've talked about in the past. All of the oligarchs got dirt on each other, and I wouldn't be surprised if it got really personal soon. Elon Musk wanted to buy OpenAI for $100 billion, and that, of course, signaled that his AI, Grok, either sucks compared to OpenAI, or he just wants to get rid of them so his can dominate the scene, or he wants to integrate it. And then Sam Altman replied saying that he would buy Twitter for $10 billion. And then Elon Musk called him a swindler, and now he's saying that Elon Musk is insecure and needs constant adulation from billions of people in order to maintain a level of self-esteem that allows him to get through life. All I'll say is this, guys, just because you sleep on a couch and you work a lot doesn't mean you don't want to dominate the world, okay? That's what people need to realize. Yeah, there's a lot of relatable things about Elon Musk, I get it, but don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Just remember what they're selling you. Remember what the big grand master plan is, and it's to get us all into this panoptical system where everything we do is surveilled, we don't own anything, we're going to be happy. And who's bringing that in? The guy who can track us anywhere we are on our phones now with Starlink, boring holes to God knows where for the government, militarizing space, putting brain chips in our heads, creating these Tesla autonomous robots which are going to utilize Tesla vision, creating AI systems that are basically mining every aspect of your data that you input into the X platform to build some sort of digital simulacrum personality profile of you that can be leveraged against you with its predictive power in the future to manipulate and control you. That's exactly what Elon Musk is all about. But all people are going to see is, oh, he made it so that some African country couldn't get $1 million worth of condoms. At the end of the day, all of that stuff is paltry compared to the real heavy hitters in the industry that they'll never go after. I'm talking about the real heavy hitters, okay? The billions. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Now, I have a little bit more time to ramble here, and I'm going to do just that. There are two ways that you can control a population. There's the Orwellian way, and there's the Huxleyan way. One is through the use of force and coercion and the threat of punishment, and the other is with eccentricity and hedonism and the promises of infinite amounts of reward and consumption and distraction, which is typically what has subjugated the minds of the West for so long. The East, conversely, has historically anyways leveraged the Orwellian method of social control. And right now, Western countries are starting to see the benefits of that. And the Liberal government here in Canada is leveraging that very playbook right now to keep people scared. Remember that, 2 minutes of hate in the Orwell thing, where you have to go and every day, hate the enemy, and they brainwash you Clockwork Orange style. And that's why they benefit from this trade war thing with Trump. They want nothing more than a trade war. Their style has shifted from one of infinite reward and eccentricity and hedonism and 50,000 different genders now towards, and they'll probably still try to twist that in there wherever useful, towards something which is more centralized and control focused and getting you to fixate on an external enemy so you don't pay attention to the immiserating financial conditions that we're all currently living in or about to live in. So those are the two ways that you can control people. And they're both equally nefarious in terms of what their ultimate goal is, which is control, total control. Now, one seems better, the one that we've enjoyed here, where we get weak and soft and frivolous and eccentric and just overindulge to the point where we get very flaccid and are easy to manipulate, kind of like the Hunger Games District 1. You can control people. District 1, this is the perfect example of it. District 1 is the Aldous Huxley Brave New World mechanism of social control. District, 5 onwards, I guess, are the ones that are under the more totalitarian style control, where everything you do is manipulated and regulated, okay? And that's what they are moving us towards, and they do so with the threat of an external enemy. They need an external enemy in order to do this. And so do the Americans, and that's going to come. They're going to need an external enemy. I'm not sure who it's going to be. It's probably going to be Iran. It could, in fact, flare up with the Russians as well. And I could see them turning on a dime with Russia and there being some major incident take place. They pin it on the Russians and it's game over. Because with Trump's popularity levels, they can pretty much do whatever they want at this point in time. And people who are ideological backers of the MAGA movement will ride or die with Trump no matter what, for the most part. I'm not saying all people. I know there's a lot of fence sitters who voted because it was better than the alternative, but I'm talking about that hardcore 70%. I'm not sure what it is, the ones that are ride or die. That will be enough to kind of carry it. And because there's already a lot of latent Russophobia on the left actually will take to that quite well. If Trump decides to go after Russia, he'll just basically, he'll gain more followers than he will lose on the right. And that's just a reality, especially if the magnitude of whatever sort of false flag event, or maybe it'll be a real event, who knows. Anyways, guys, those are my thoughts for you to consider today. These are just thoughts for you to consider. That's it. That's all. I hope I gave you something compelling to think about. If not, well, maybe next time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoy the varied content that we present to you on this channel, I do movie reviews, I do gear reviews, novelty gear items, we do preparedness-related content, and we also do our daily World War III rants. No, the world isn't ending, but it very well could, so you better stay ready. Thanks for watching.